What are the 10 biggest mistakes companies make when they develop a balanced scorecard? I help companies develop strategic performance management systems, and I have designed many balanced scorecards for corporate and government clients all across the world. And sometimes organizations bring me in to review their existing balanced scorecards. And from my experience, 80% I would say are complete rubbish because organizations fall into lots of traps. So in this video, I want to look at what are the 10 biggest mistakes. If you want to go back and understand how you actually develop a scorecard and so on, how you develop the right indicators, there are other videos on this channel that you can dive into. So let's look at the biggest mistakes. Number one is if you don't get the buy-in and engagement of the senior leadership team. I've seen this in practice where organizations have come to me and say, hey, have a look at our balanced scorecard. We just had one of these big consulting companies in who've designed this for us. And you think, okay, what was the level of engagement with the senior leadership team? How have they really helped develop this? How much buy-in have they got into the balanced scorecard? And this is often a very big hurdle. If it feels detached, so the leadership team hasn't really inputted this, they don't own the balanced scorecard goals, then it will never work. It ends up as a nice little product that goes into a drawer and is not really delivered. So when I work with organizations, what we do is I sit down with every key person in the organization and talk to them about their strategic goals, what they believe the organization needs to focus on, some of the key challenges, and based on this, I then develop a balanced scorecard or a strategy map. And this is such a nice process because you get complete buy-in and everyone in the organization feels that they have equally contributed to this process. Again, when I see other organizations do this in practice, they quite often run workshops. And in those workshops, you often get one or two people who are more articulate, they are contributing more than others, and then you get a very biased view of the strategy of the organization. So for me, these one-to-ones are really vital in this process. So buy-in and senior level engagement. If we don't get this, you will not end up with a good balanced scorecard. The second mistake I see is where organizations believe that the balanced scorecard is just a measurement framework. So they are starting the development of their scorecard by looking at what they could be measuring. Instead, what they should be doing, looking at the strategic goals. If we start looking at measures, you will end up measuring everything that walks and moves and nothing that matters. You will end up measuring everything that is easy to measure or all the KPIs that other organizations are measuring in your industry. Instead of really figuring out what do we need to do as an organization and then developing the metrics that will help you understand whether you're doing this or not. So if you start with KPIs, this is the wrong process. You need to start by defining your strategic goals, ideally designing a strategy map that outlines your goals on a simple one-page document that then outlines how the different parts of the organization work together to deliver your organizational strategy. Another mistake I see regularly is where organizations basically develop a balanced scorecard simply by filling in boxes. So they look at the balanced scorecard as a 4-perspective framework that looks at customers, finance, internal processes, learning and growth, and then they simply say, okay, now let's fill in those boxes instead of stepping back and saying, okay, what is actually the strategy of our business? What do we need to do? What do we want to achieve in terms of finance? What do we want to sell to our customers? Who are our customers? What's our value proposition? What do we have to be really good at as a business internally? And what are some of the key enablers that will make this happen? If you start this way, you will make sure you cover the entire strategy of your organization. And sometimes you will end up with a balanced scorecard that might have 5 or 6 perspectives. So it's not about filling in boxes, it's all about reflecting on the strategy of your organization and then creating a framework that represents your organization and what it wants to achieve this year or the next. The fourth mistake is not creating a strategy map. I regularly talk to Bob Kaplan and Dave Norton, the inventors of the balanced scorecard, and they very often tell me is that if they could reinvent the concept, they would have started with the third book they wrote, which is called Strategy Maps. Because the first book they wrote, the balanced scorecard, is representing the scorecard as a 4-box model. And what Bob and Dave are now saying is that actually you haven't got a balanced scorecard if you haven't got a strategy map. Because this picture of understanding the cause and effect relationships is absolutely vital. And to create this one-page visual picture of your goal, saying, usually if you're a commercial organization, you would start with finance at the top. Okay, how are you achieving your financial goals? By delivering something to your customers. Okay, how are you delivering something to your customers? To be really good at some of these internal processes. And how do we do this? By having the right enablers in place in terms of the right people, the right organizational culture, the right information, and so on. So by creating this cause and effect link and then having this visual representation, this makes it such a much more powerful process, and you then have something that you can easily communicate across the organization too. Mistake number 5 is when companies copy scorecards from someone else. On my website, I have lots of examples, case studies of how companies have developed scorecards and what they look like. And sometimes it's very tempting. So I have a few examples of banks and a few examples of telecom companies and businesses across all sectors. I actually the potential client rang me up and said, okay, have a look at our balanced scorecard. We would like you to review this as an external expert to see how good it is. And I looked at this and I thought, I recognize this. This looks very similar to a balanced scorecard I designed for another client. So it very quickly became obvious that they copied the balanced scorecard. And sometimes this is tempting because if you think I'm a bank and this other bank has developed already a balanced scorecard and they've identified their goals, let's just simply copy this across. The thing is, some of those goals might be the same. But if you think about this, every bank is different. They have different challenges at this point in time. They focus on different customers. They have different issues around IT and people and culture. So sometimes the financial goals at the top look quite similar, but as soon as you dive into the strategy of the organization, where you define, okay, what customers and what markets which ones am I focusing on this year? This has to be different for every organization, and therefore copying a balanced scorecard would be a big mistake. Mistake number 6 is not creating action plans for your strategic goals. If you create a strategy that looks nice and articulates your strategic goals, and you then don't make sure that you have a clear action plan, that you don't have initiatives and projects linked to each of those goals that will help you deliver it, then your strategy is just a trip to fairyland, where you basically say this is all nice to have stuff, but there's no real action plans in place to help you deliver this. And this is why so many companies end up with a nice, pretty looking strategy, but they fail to execute this and deliver this in the long run. So the balanced scorecard framework, basically, as part of this, you would then design actions and initiatives for each of your goals, and this is what you need to do to make sure you have a good scorecard and a good strategy in place. Mistake number 7 is not developing good KPIs. Again, I talked about KPIs before. There's a big temptation that we simply measure everything that is easy to collect and easy to measure, or the things that we can easily count. This is a mistake, because what we need to do is we need to figure out what do we now really need to know. So if you've developed a strategic goal, my advice is to develop what I call a key performance question, saying, okay, what question do I actually want to have an answer to help me understand how well I'm delivering this strategic goal? And by articulating your question, you then articulate your real information need. And then you need to think about, okay, how can I now use data, metrics, to help me answer this question? So the key is that we are finding the metrics are really important instead of the things we can easily measure. Some examples, instead of measuring how many hours have people spent in training courses, if this was one of my goals to give people more training, wouldn't it be better to measure the value of those training courses? Instead of in call centers measuring call duration, wouldn't it be better to measure the customer value of this call? And sometimes we think, okay, this is a bit too difficult, there are no standard KPIs available, so you revert back to this as easy to measure indicators, and this is a big mistake and a big opportunity missed if you don't develop KPIs that really link to your strategy. Number 8 is the mistake of not communicating insights regularly. Once you have a scorecard in place, you have your goals, you have your KPIs, this then enables you to collect information regularly, to analyze this information and communicate to everyone how well you're doing. And this needs to happen. You want to engage people in this process throughout the year, that they get regular updates about how well you're doing against your goals, what goals you're already delivering, where some of the challenges are, and using the data that you're collecting on your KPIs and analyzing it well gives you this opportunity to turn this into meaningful communications, into meaningful performance reports and dashboards that really engage everyone as you deliver your strategy. Mistake number 9 is where we don't review and monitor and discuss our strategy execution on a regular basis. What needs to be, I believe, needs to happen in all organizations is that on a monthly basis, we sit down and say, how well are we now doing this? So it's all well and good having meaningful dashboards and reports in place, but they need to inform discussions where the senior decision makers in this organization come together and say, okay, how well are we now doing this? How do we now need to change? What do we need to do differently? What actions come out of our insights? And this really is vital. What I see in too many organizations is that this is done maybe on a quarterly basis only, so it's not regularly enough, and where this is simply a dump of information. So where you simply bombard people with metrics and data instead of looking at real insights and then spending the time to review this, discuss this. So for me, more time needs to be spent on discussing what it means and the future rather than reviewing the past. And again, I've done a video on this. If you want to look at my channel, there's a whole video on how to run better performance improvement meetings. And the final mistake is not to revise and review your strategy. Sometimes I develop balanced scorecards for organizations and then they bring me back 3 years later to have a look at what they've been doing, and basically they have the same balanced scorecard in place. And then you have to ask them, okay, hasn't your business changed? Hasn't the environment hasn't your environment changed? Are there not new competitors? Are you not looking at new products and services, new challenges? So what every organization needs to do at least annually, if not 6 monthly, is to look at your scorecard, look at your strategic goals, and to think, are they still the right ones? How do I need to update them? How do I need to adjust my strategy? Some of those goals you will have delivered, so they can come off your scorecard. New ones will be added, so you need to add them to your scorecard. And what you want to do is you want to make this a live document that lives and changes as your organization changes in order to make sure that your strategy stays up to date and your business delivers success into the future. So these are the top 10 mistakes that I have identified, and hopefully they will help you develop a great balanced scorecard for your organization and you can avoid those.